Hello and welcome back to my channel, where today I'm painting another pet portrait of the lovely Barney, and this is a painting that I did for myself for display purposes, so it wasn't actually client request, a bit similar to last week's video. And so because of that I got to pick a photo that I wanted to work with, which is always good. So it got me thinking about what do I look for in a reference photo when I want to paint a pet portrait. So I thought that will be the theme of today's video, so that's what we're going to talk about. And I have a list of 5 things that seems to be a theme for me. There's a few other videos where I've got a list of 5 things, so why break that habit? So I'm gonna get right to that. I will itemize it, so if you want to have a look at it at a glance, you can, but if you want to watch the painting come together and stick around for the whole thing, then let's get started. So as I mentioned, this painting is for display purposes, so I'm hoping to at some point exhibit in person. And I don't know about you, but if you're a pet portrait artist, do you have these issues if it comes to exhibiting your work in that you don't have anything you can show? Because that seems to be my problem. Although I guess it's not a problem if you're making that work and then you're selling it and your clients have it in their homes, that's great. But I find if I want to think about a craft stall or an art fair, that I don't really have anything I could actually use or put on a table or put on a display. So the paintings that I'm doing at the moment, I've decided to do quite a few for this purpose, and that is what we're seeing come together here. And I found that because I'm not actually working with a client and that I can choose my own reference photo, that I could be a little bit more picky about exactly what I wanted to work with. And that gave me the idea for the theme of today's video. So we're going to talk about the 5 things that I try and look for when I'm working on a pet portrait. So let's dive right in to the first point on the list. So first things first, this is such a straightforward point that it probably goes without saying. However, if I took that attitude to all of these points, then it really wouldn't be the most entertaining YouTube video. So I shall say it anyway, and that is I would like a photo that is clear and crisp and in focus, where I can see as much detail as possible for my painting. Now, I don't use a really hyper-realistic style, and I try to keep things loose. I mean, detail does keep creeping in there, but I try. That's the main thing, to keep things loose. So it's not the most important thing in the world to have every whisker or every hair visible. However, I still prefer for the photo to be really nice and clear. That way, if I decide that I'm not going to include that information, then I'm doing that because it is an artistic choice, rather than I just can't include it because it's not there for me to see in the first place. As a quick demonstration, here is a picture of my pet rabbit. And from a distance, it might not look too difficult to work from, but you can see as you zoom in that there really isn't a huge amount of detail there. Now, I might still be able to paint this, but I'm going to struggle for fine detail. And if I wanted to work in a really hyper-realistic style, then this just wouldn't be any good for me. This, on the other hand, would be something that's suitable. There's a lot more detail there. Because I'm not working in a hyper-realistic style, that would be perfect for what I need it for. So that's really nice and clear and crisp. I'd definitely be able to use that in a painting. The next point for me is probably one of the most important things, and that is the consideration of lighting in your picture. For me, this really can make or break a painting, so I think it's one of the most important things to consider. And I think as artists, we probably have different opinions when it comes to exactly what kind of lighting we want to see in a photograph. Some of us might like a really bright and colourful images, whereas others might want to create more atmosphere and want something a bit darker. You might want really dramatic lighting. But for me, my personal preference is to have natural lighting. And I think that's not too bad when it comes to pet portraits, because a lot of people take pictures of their pets outside. So that works pretty nicely. And if you can't do that, then sometimes by a window where you've got that natural light coming in, those are definitely my favourite types of lighting to work from. Another consideration for me when it comes to lighting is that I really like there to be directional light that creates a nice contrast. So what I'm looking for in a photo are some really beautiful dark shadows and then really nice bright highlights that contrast with that, with a great set of midtones in between. And for me, that creates a really nice painting. If I can get all of that information into my painting, I'll be happy. And I think you can see a sense of that in the picture that influenced this painting. So you've got the sunlight coming in through the window on the left-hand side. So you've got one side of the face that's really bright and illuminated. And then on the other side, you've got lovely shadows in contrast. And I love working with this so much because it's so much easier for me to build up a shape and a form when you've got that information. You might hear artists talk about values a lot, which kind of relates to the light and dark in a painting. And values are so important when it comes to creating a really realistic and beautiful painting, I think. And if you have a picture where the values are really similar right the way across the board and there's not a lot of variation, then it can be difficult to create a nice painting from that because it might come across as a little bit flat. So this photograph here is kind of an example of that. You've got a highlight on the ear at the top, but for the rest of the body it's very much in shadow and the values are the same or really similar right the way across. So if I tried to paint this, it'd be really difficult to make the rabbit look three-dimensional. He might look a little bit flat and sunken into the picture a bit. So I definitely prefer there to be obvious highlights and shadows to work from. Now, the way I see it is that there are two sides when it comes to picking a suitable reference photo. And one of those sides is the artist side, where I'm looking at what is going to make the best painting, which photo can I turn into the best looking portrait. And then the other side of that is which of these is going to give me the easiest time as an artist, which of these is going to be the most straightforward to paint, because that quite often will produce the best work rather than something that is going to give me a really hard time because there's not a lot of contrast and it's going to be much more difficult to work with. Now, the things that are a little bit flatter in value and don't have that strong lighting are a bit more difficult. I have worked from them before and I will work from them in future, but they are definitely more challenging for me to try and get that 3D shape coming through than a picture that has really strong lighting. But I think that's something that I'd like to develop as an artist. You know, I still consider that I'm at the beginning of my career with it all ahead of me, and that's something that I think over time should get a bit better, because I think there will be ways of compensating for that, such as working with temperature of the colour to compensate for the fact that you might not have that difference in value. So I would like to see how that develops, but for now, if I had a choice, then I would always choose to go for the image that has really nice strong lighting that I feel like I can do a good job of and create a beautiful portrait that my client will hopefully really enjoy. So next up on my list, it's a little bit related to lighting, but the next point is all about colour. Now, you might be thinking, well, if you receive a photo of the pet, then you know what colour it is because it's in the photo. And in a way, that is true. However, there is also the possibility that the colour in the photo might not be quite accurate. And this happens a little bit more often than you might imagine. And I think that's probably because as pet owners, we recognize our pet anywhere. So we see them all the time and we know exactly what they're supposed to look like. Like, I have a dog and I know he's black and white. And if I take a photo of him in an indoor setting where the lighting's a bit orange and it looks like his fur is a bit brown, I still know that he's black and white. But if I sent that photo to someone else, then they're not to know that those aren't brown highlights on his legs, that that's just a trick of a light. So I think that it happens a bit more frequently than you would think, because it's something that as owners we just overlook and we don't necessarily think too much about. And it's a bit difficult to resolve in that you don't know that there's a problem with the colour in the first place. So for me, I think the main thing I will try and do in future is just to have a discussion with the client and make sure that the colour that I'm looking at in the photo is accurate and that that is exactly what that pet looks like before I get started. And sometimes at the end of a painting I'll be able to rework some areas, so I don't work in such a style where I can't do that. So that's always an option, but I definitely prefer to be on the right track from the beginning. So I think just having that proper consultation and making sure the colour is right before I just launch myself into the painting is probably the best way to go. And I also think a little bit of that unusual colour in the painting isn't necessarily a bad thing for me, because if that's how the pet looked on the day and the fur looks like that because it's reacting to the atmosphere, then I think I'd quite like to get a sense of that in the painting anyway. As long as the client was happy for me to do that, then I'd like to try and capture the fur as it was in that moment, just so it doesn't look too out of place. But to know what colour it's supposed to be in the first place would probably be useful, just so that I don't over exaggerate it and make it look really obviously wrong. So it's worth considering. It might not be an issue, but it's something that is on my list of things to look for in a reference photo, and that is that the colour looks like the colour it's supposed to be. Right, so moving on to point number 4, and it is all about the consideration of perspective. Now, some of this might come down to personal preference, because I think as artists we all like different things, but for me, something that I try and look for when it comes to perspective is that I like to be at eye level with the pet rather than standing above them looking down. I think it builds a better connection with the pet when you're at that level, because you can see their eyes and you can see all of their features, and it becomes completely obvious that they are the main focus of your painting. Something that I prefer even more than that is to be at that eye level, but to have them looking in the opposite direction, or to have them looking over your shoulder. Not the opposite direction, because then I'd be looking at the back of their head. But if the pet's looking off into the distance somewhere, I feel like that adds a lot of character to the painting. It's like they have something better to be doing than sitting there posing for your photos, that they're lost in their own thoughts and they're completely oblivious to what you're trying to do. And I really like to try and capture that in a painting, so that's something that I look for with perspective. Another thing that I consider is the distance from the pet. So I don't want to be really far away where I can't see any details, but I also don't want to be really close and have that distort the image a bit. So sometimes if I get a bit too close with the camera, then my dog's nose might look huge in comparison to the rest of his body. There are some artists who do a really great job of those exaggerated features, but if I'm wanting to focus on getting the proportions right, then I need to make sure that I'm the right distance away when I take that picture in the first place. So although I prefer the eye level perspective, that doesn't mean to say that other perspectives don't work, and this is where I think personal preference comes into it. So the standing above looking down thing, sometimes that can be problematic because you can't see very much of the pet. You might get a bit of that distortion where the nose is a lot bigger because it's much closer to the camera than everything else, or you might not be able to see the body at all in the picture. However, there are some times when that might work, and this is a picture of my dog. Once again, he has been the model for many of these example pictures. Here he is engaging with the camera, so he's looking up at me, and you've got that connection there. So even though it's not at eye level, you've still got that connection even though you're standing above looking down. And for a lot of people, they might be quite familiar with this pose and with this face because it's what you see a lot of, it's what you see all the time. So if a client wanted a picture like this, then I wouldn't mind doing a painting from this perspective. I've been trying to look for a photo which illustrates a bad example of standing above and looking down and a perspective that wouldn't work. And it's quite difficult because when I take photos of my dog, I'm usually taking them with the intention that I might paint from them, so that's always in the back of my mind. So it's been difficult to find, but this one I think probably comes closest, and it's not totally terrible, but it kind of illustrates the point, so we'll run with it. So here I am above the dog looking down, so we don't have that eye contact anymore, and he's looking off into the distance, so there's no real connection there whatsoever. So if I tried to put this into a painting, I don't think it would be very compelling because you just don't have that eye contact, you're not at that level, and it would be a bit of an odd composition. Like I said, personal preference comes into this, and as artists we are all very different, so some people might be able to make a good job of this, but for me personally this is something that I would avoid. It might work if I was a little bit lower down and I could see more detail in his eyes, but for me this composition and this perspective just doesn't work very well. So we've reached the end of the list. And this point I feel is a bit different to the rest because it considers multiple reference images together rather than just individual ones. So for me, if I had a choice, I would have a preference for just working from one image and that's it, rather than trying to combine information from lots of different reference photos. And I think that's just because in one image you've got the pet, you've got information about the lighting, you've got the atmosphere in the background, and all of that comes together to make one cohesive photo. Whereas if you're trying to combine multiple pictures, there can be difficulties there in that the lighting can be different in different images. Maybe one of the photos was taken outside and the other is inside. The perspective might be different in each photo. The light might be the same, but it could be coming from a different direction. So there are lots of ways that multiple pictures can complicate a portrait because they're not all taken under the same conditions. So yeah, my final point is that I really prefer to work from one when I can, and if I am going to combine multiple images, then I'd really prefer them to be taken on the same day, in the same conditions, at the same level, so that everything comes together and works quite nicely in the painting. So for example, if I really liked the position of this picture but I wanted him to be in a more outdoor or sunlight setting, this would be a bit difficult. Not impossible, but it would be difficult because the lighting here is very much an indoor lighting setting. You've got that orange indoor light feel to this. So if I wanted to put him in an outdoor setting, then I'd really have to think about the colours and how I would change that so he matched the surroundings. Otherwise he might look like he was a bit superimposed. So it wouldn't be impossible, but it would be difficult, and if I had a choice I would prefer just to use the one reference photo from the one place and have everything be really cohesive. Well, I have reached the end of my list, so here are a few final thoughts before I wrap this up. So for me, an important thing to remember is that a pet portrait for me is really a combined effort between what I would like as the artist and what my client would like in terms of the finished product. So although I have this list of things that I look for in reference photos and they will definitely inform my decision, it's still important for me to take into consideration what the client's requests are, because sometimes our favourite pictures won't always be the same. I'm looking for something that I think is going to make a really great painting, and the client is probably looking for something that has sentimental value or one that really shows the character of the pet. So I will always consider what their favourite pictures are when I'm trying to decide which one I'm going to paint from. And as long as their favourite is workable and I think I can do a decent job of it, then that one will always be the one I will try and do. So I think that about wraps things up. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed watching this painting come together in the background. I really enjoyed painting Barney. I really liked the lighting in this, so I hope you like it too. Let me know what you think in the comments below, or if you've got any questions, please leave a thumbs up if you like this video, and feel free to subscribe if you want to stick around for some more art related content. I will leave you to watch the rest of this video, and I will see you next time.